For me, there is perhaps no group of people more fascinating, complex, and wonderful than teenagers. Now, I'm not a mother myself at this point, but for the past 8.5 years, it has been my great joy and privilege to walk alongside hundreds of young women and men as they navigate the unique insanity of high school life. Right out of college, as a hopeful, utterly clueless 22-year-old, I spent a year serving with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Houston, Texas. My work consisted of teaching drama and coordinating campus ministry at the then brand new Cristo Rey Jesuit, a college prep high school for low-income, at-risk youth. That's how I met a student who would forever change me. Let's call him Juan. Creative, compassionate, overflowing with energy, Juan is one of the funniest people who I've ever known. He was quite a popular kid. He spent his time kind of waffling between hanging out with cool kids and reaching out to other students who needed a friend. His mother, this amazing woman from El Salvador, worked tirelessly to support her son on her own. She had fled with Juan from her husband, who drank too much and who abused her physically and verbally. Cristo Rey was Juan's chance to create something new for himself and for his family. By the time he'd gotten there, though, he was already several grades behind in most subjects and was battling severe, undiagnosed ADHD. He clearly brought joy to so many people at our school, but it also was clear that he had taken in some of the messages that had been passed on throughout his life. That he was just a poor kid from Houston, that he would never amount to anything because he wasn't smart enough, and perhaps his worst fear, that he might not ever be better than his dad. I didn't teach Juan myself, but he often visited my classroom to tell me stories, catch up on life, give me updates, joke around. And it struck me at some point during the year that this kid had absolutely no idea how amazing he was. He did not realize that he was known by God, loved by God, and called by God. So I made it a part of my mission that year to somehow try to let him know. We celebrated his little victories, and I definitely called him out when he was not trying his hardest. He shared with me some stories, and I encouraged him to write them down. We spent every single day together working throughout summer school. Lots of other adults rallied around him too, and by the end of his sophomore year, Juan had won an award for being the most improved student in the school. And this year, Juan is graduating from college. When I started my ministry at St. Ignatius College Prep 6 years ago, I experienced a little bit of culture shock at first. Our school is blessed with stunning spaces, an abundance of resources, this rich history. Many, though certainly not all, of our students come from upper middle class white families whose experiences look quite a bit different from Juan's. And for a while, I found myself getting caught up in these differences. But as I've met and known and loved the astonishing students at St. Ignatius, some common themes have emerged, messages that some of them have taken in throughout their lives. That they're defined by what they have or by what they don't have. That they're limited by what other people say about them. That they'll never be enough as they are. Like Juan, these students too need mirrors to reflect back to them their identities as being known by God, loved by God, and called by God. We witness in this first reading today a trio of relationships. There's a young man named Samuel, his mentor Eli, and the ever-persistent God. As we so often see in Scripture and in our own lives, God reaches out again and again to this unlikely candidate. God's Spirit longs to speak in and through this young person's life. Granted, it takes a few tries, but our God is not easily deterred. God communicates through Eli, this model minister, in my view. See, Eli's role is clear. He creates space for his mentee and for God to encounter one another. And then he gets out of the way. And his advice is simple. Samuel, you are called to serve God. Invite God to speak. Then listen. You are called. Invite God to speak. Then listen. As we enter into this week then, we might consider a few questions for reflection. First, who have been the Elis in our lives? Or in other words, who have been those mirrors, reflecting back our identities as known, loved, and called? For me, I think immediately back to former campus ministers, teachers, and even some students who have helped to bring me back home to myself. Who have been our Elis, and how might we express our gratitude to them? Second, for whom are we called to be like Eli? That is, how have we seen God working in and through someone who might not see herself or himself that way? How can we affirm the goodness in another person and encourage them to respond to God's call for their lives? So how can we be Eli? And finally, a reminder. God does not only call the young. Regardless of our age, our experiences, our relationships, God continues to call out to each and every one of us. My spiritual director defines the practice of discernment as poised readiness. And that's a tough one for me. Poised readiness. Invite God to speak, then listen. Perhaps the older we get, the more challenging it is for us to open up our hearts that way. It's tough for adults as we grow to continue to be open and to sort through God's ongoing desires for our lives. Can we listen and trust our identities as being known, loved, and called by God always, without limit, without condition? Can we hear that call and respond honestly to God? Speak, your servant is listening.